Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
Emails are mostly other people's priorities at work. I never start my day by reading email. It's all about protecting your most creative time.
Hello and welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Today we have the privilege to speak with Ahmed Wasfy, who holds a Master of Applied Science degree in both electrical and computer engineering. Ahmed has worked as a senior engineer and engineering manager at software giants Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. In addition to his current role at Amazon, he also coaches engineers on how to become great tech leaders through a structured framework he has pieced together during his own years in leadership. Ahmed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, what made you decide to become an engineer?
Good question. I think like a lot of engineers, especially those in the software field, it was really the, wanting to create things myself. And perhaps with the world of software, you can see the results a little bit quicker, which gets you more excited as you're a kid. And that kind of, really kind of fueled my passion for the profession.
Yeah, it's funny. The word creation pops up a lot. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, software, you get to see things a lot quicker. And then I also realized, software has actually helped mechanical engineering because we have CAD now, and you do get to see things pretty quickly when you're doing CAD thanks to software. So thank you, all of you software engineers out there who have made the ME's job even more enjoyable. Well, how did you get into leadership?
Good question. So I think one of the lenses where I'd like to think about that is oftentimes when you look back at significant sort of moments or changes or milestones in your life and your career, you could start to notice some patterns and extract kind of the core values that you care about from those, and that can sometimes help inform your future direction. So when I did a similar exercise at a time when I was considering kind of, going into leadership officially, I noticed a couple of themes pop up, and they were really around learning and impact. On the learning side, a lot of my moves were fueled by learning. I wanted to learn about a new kind of, industry or a new technology space, and that informed some of my earlier career pivots, or career changes rather. And on the impact side, as I've grown to become a senior engineer, I could see the impact of my work amplify. I remember when I kind of decided to make that transition, I was at Microsoft at the time. I was a senior engineer on the OneNote team. It's a note-taking app, part of Office 365. And at the time, I wanted to modernize Office's entire kind of web development stack. And we were able to achieve it, but I was lucky enough to be a senior engineer back then and could influence a number of engineers to help me actually achieve that. And that got me thinking, wow, the impact I could have here, can just multiply beyond myself if I continue down this kind of, leadership path. And then on the learning front, believe it or not, technical challenges were getting kind of repetitive for me at that point because, there's very well structured kind of, patterns and templates for doing things. And once you've done it a few times, it tends to be more boring if you're not doing, the real cutting edge work. But people were a complete black box to me. And back then, and it's not like a computer where you program it and it does what you tell it to do. So that was another one that actually influenced me to get into leadership and, to learn more about people and dive more into, that mysterious world.
A new challenge, huh? Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, you've been working with people for quite a while now as a leader. And as you talked about patterns, as you have worked with these different engineers over the years, what patterns have you seen, or what are some of the common problematic patterns that you see new engineering leaders fall into, and how can they avoid those?
Yeah, no, there's quite a few. I think some of the ones that I think every new manager I work with definitely experiences. The first one is around feedback loops. So we talked earlier about software and even things like CAD helping you see the results a lot quicker, and so as an individual contributor, your feedback loop is really short. You could write some code, you could run it, you could see the output of your work. Sometimes you could even push it to production and get metrics about how people are using it in the real world. So you get, the feedback loop really quickly, and you know exactly what's going on. As a leader, most of the, big results that you're trying to do, you're trying to grow individuals, you're trying to deliver larger projects where there isn't really a very quick feedback cycle. These things take months and years to bear fruit. And sometimes in new leaders, especially, it's very hard for them to gauge whether or not they're going on, in the right direction, or they're doing the right thing. And it can be a challenge to kind of work on a longer time scale or time horizon. And some of the ways to mitigate that is essentially try to find quicker indicators of progress along your journey. I'll give you a very simple example to drive a point home. Most leaders have weekly one-on-ones with individuals on their team. A quick way, I'd like to do a pulse check is I ask a happiness rating question at the end of my one-on-one. Well, I'll be like, rate your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. And engineers like to think, like to quantify things all the time. So I find that engineers love that. But also it gives you interesting avenues for discussions and to take questions in either direction. Like if it's a 9, cool, why is it not an 8? Or if it's a 7, why is it so low? You were just a 9 a couple of weeks ago. So you could often find problems either in terms of work environment or maybe even outside of work, and you could help kind of mitigate some of that for the individuals.
Oh, I like that a lot. I like the scale. Yeah. Engineers do love numbers. We ask a similar question in our one-on-ones. We just ask, do you still feel happy working here? But I like the addition of the scale, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy do you feel? That's great. Because then you can see trends and patterns over time.
Exactly. I actually graph that, and you can often see it at a team level with big sort of like reorgs or big changes. You could see a drop sometimes, and as a leader, it helps you sometimes kind of get ahead of some of the bigger concerns.
Interesting. Very cool.
But yeah, so that's one, feedback loops, and another kind of common pattern new leaders fall into is they fail to recognize this is a completely new job requiring a completely new set of skills. It's often easier to default in what we know. Default back to your technical kind of skills, or you're strong technically, so you kind of shy away in that corner and try to still be the technical expert and the SME on your team, when now it's not your job anymore. It's you got to let your actual individual contributors, your actual engineers shine. And not just that, but also invest in that skill gap, right? Like learn all the soft skills that you need to become a more effective leader. Everything from communicating effectively to negotiating with partners to coaching your team to managing up. So that shift takes a while, but it's a very, very important one that every leader has to make as they scale up. And then maybe the third and final one is just easier to think in terms of 3, and you'll notice that theme a lot, hopefully throughout our chat today. But the third one is not relying on good intentions, but actually establishing sort of, I call them habits, but some people call them, processes or systems or mechanisms to make sure the right things get done. It's very easy to, gather your team, be like, hey guys, we're not moving fast enough. You got to try harder. And everyone is like, yeah. And everyone has good intentions. Like everyone wants to actually do better and improve things, but without a process, a system in place, nothing actually gets done. And it's on you as a leader to develop that. So kind of instead of being a victim and, blaming everything else that's going wrong around you, own that and establish those mechanisms. And as you know, as we continue in our chat today, we can dive into some examples as we get more specific into different areas and things.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in systems and processes. And one of my processes, I think sometimes when people hear like systems or processes, they think these really complicated, convoluted things. And they're like, oh, I don't even know how to start thinking about that. It's like, it's going to be this big thing and all this work. Systems can be super easy, super simple. One of my favorite systems is at the beginning of the week, I calendar everything. I put in calendar events for what I'm going to do on each day. Takes like, maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It's really easy, but that's a system, and it's a great system that's worked well for me.
That's a fantastic system, and one I follow it to this day. One thing I often like to add as well is, it doesn't matter where you start. You can start with any system. One thing that makes a system really, really powerful is what I call it reflection, having to close that feedback. Basically, at the end of the week, I do the same exercise that I did at the start of the week, where I look back and be like, cool, those were my top priorities. This is what I said I wanted to get done. What happened? And then how can I be 1% better next week? And kind of reflecting back on any kind of system you put in place helps you iterate and improve it over time.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, you have, speaking of systems, a framework that you use to manage stress, increase effectiveness, and help leaders thrive. There's your category of 3s there again. Will you walk us through that framework?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the high level, and I'll talk about it in again. It's like I said, system with 3s. I'll talk about some of the principles I have for each. So I have 3 main pillars to be an effective leader. I call them managing yourself, managing your people, and managing your projects. I'll talk about some of the principles in each, and I work in my coaching practice. I work with individuals to actually implement, things that you could do concretely to actually drive some of these points home. But big picture, high level, it's the way I like to conceptualize this is very similar. It's a system. In each of those 3 pillars, there are some principles that you want to do, and ways to measure if you're doing the right thing or not. And then reflection built in, where you basically look back and be like, cool, what happened? How can we improve? And you keep iterating and improving across all those 3. So let's jump in the first one, managing yourself, right? Because it all starts with you. If, especially as a new leader, you'll have more demands on your time than ever before. And if you don't have an effective system to managing your own time, your calendar, your inbox, which tends to be messy and crazy, and more importantly, the work that you have to do, and sometimes that could mean you doing the actual work or you delegating and following up and holding individual people accountable on finishing that work. So you need that system in place, and so some of the principles there, start with protecting your time. Pay yourself first, time-wise. Make sure, just like your example where you look at your calendar at the start of the week and block time off for the things that need to happen. Make sure you do that. Managing your energy is actually a very, very critical component of that. It's not just about time management, but for example, it's easier to have a block of one-on-one meetings than the same chunk of time, where you're context switching between one-on-ones and project updates and operational reviews, and that is way more taxing in your energy. So managing your energy efficiently throughout the week as well can be a big part of that. And then I mentioned kind of having a system to manage the work. So you need a way to be able to sort of have an intake process for the things that you need to make sure get done. You need a way to prioritize them regularly, and a way to kind of follow up on any of the work that you delegated. So you make sure it actually gets done. And then the next principle is take breaks. New leaders especially make this mistake a lot. They'll be booked kind of back to back to back through lunch, through everything, and they just, by the end of the day, you're as your blood sugar levels drop, you take worse and worse decisions. And long term is not good for your kind of overall efficiency as a leader in general. So I actually, I block time for lunch. I block time for like coffee breaks and throughout the week as well, because you need that time.
Sorry,
Go
if I can interrupt really quickly. I thought it was really interesting that you talked about managing your energy levels, because that's not something I hear people talk about a lot. And I think it's super important. So scheduling breaks, that's one way to do it. Are there other things that you have done to manage your energy? I mean, batching like activities, that was another one you talked about.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, those are probably the biggest two ones, scheduling breaks, batching like activities. I've noticed, and everyone has a slightly different threshold. I've noticed I can't do more than 4 one-on-ones back to back effectively. If I have, more than 4, I'm grumpy. I'm not very effective. That'll be different for everyone. Some individuals, might have more capacity, might have less capacity for it. So that's where kind of, monitoring and kind of reflecting at the end of, the week comes in, where you'd be like, cool, on Wednesday, I was actually really annoyed and grumpy. Why is that? Oh, I've had, a 6-hour block of meetings. Cool, let's break that up. Let's figure out what's going on here. So that definitely comes into play. The breaks help a lot because you need food, food, water. Outside of the actual kind of, 9 to 5, your actual work calendar, the big 3, sleep, I call them the, fundies or fundamentals, sleep, exercise or movement, and nutrition, right? Like those need to be more or less, dialed in. 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That starts the night before. Have a go to bed alarm instead of a wake up alarm. Nutrition. There's a lot of kind of different takes on nutrition, but in general, eat kind of mostly organic food, mostly plants. Don't eat too much, and make sure you have sufficient protein. Do the different kind of mix in there, and then movement, even if it's as simple as a 30-minute kind of walk every day, or at least if you don't have the time, do a 7-minute workout, but just make sure your body's active and moving. Those are sort of like fundamentals before you actually get to the actual day-to-day management of your calendar and such.
I want to continue to talk about this a little bit more, because this is something that I'm working on right now personally, is energy levels. And I get really good sleep consistently. That's not a problem. I exercise 6 days a week pretty intensely. That's not a problem either. But food was always my Achilles heel. I love pizza and cheeseburgers and Philly cheesesteak sandwiches, right? Like all these delicious foods that are not necessarily great for you or your energy levels. And I realized that I was getting sick a lot. Like in the past year, I've gotten sick, a pretty severe cold or a flu, like 4 times, which is just so much, right? And so that was finally enough to say, okay, I'm going to change my eating habits and see if that makes a difference. And I just started this like 3 weeks ago. So I'm new to eating mostly, whole foods, lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, nuts, whole grains, still some meat in there. But one thing that's been interesting is I've been having 5 meals each day. So I'll do, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then I'll have a morning snack and afternoon snack. And I'm actually consuming quite a few less calories than I was before, but I feel full all the time. Like I almost don't want to eat because I just feel full always. And I guess it's because, well, maybe 2 things. I'm eating much more nutrient dense foods now than I was eating before. Before it was just high calorie foods, right? And now it's much more nutrient dense. And maybe the second thing is I'm spacing it out over, 5 times a day. So anyway, that's been really interesting. And I've noticed that I'm not hungry. I don't know. This is anecdotal at best right now, but I think my energy levels are a little bit better. Anyway, it's interesting that you bring this up because I'm going through this right now myself.
So a question for you, because the number one, sort of pushback I get is how do you meal prep, or how do you make sure you get those kind of 5 meals a day?
I basically eat the same thing every day, which is boring. I love good food. Oh my gosh, I love good food so much. And I've always had a pretty fast metabolism, so it hasn't been much of an issue. But yeah, I was like getting sick, getting colds all the time. So I changed things. And now, I meal prep every couple of days. I'll make enough for 2 days. So yeah, that's what I do. And pretty much just eat mostly the same thing every day.
Fair enough. If you actually think about it, a lot of us eat the same 10 to 12 meals 80% of the time anyway. So it's very easy to add variety. It's just, a matter of switching out some of the bad habits.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's hard to get started, but then once you build the habit, then it's usually easy to keep it going.
Yeah. It was kind of overwhelming at first. I remember the first day trying to meal plan everything. I just felt like, oh, this is too much. I can't handle this. But I pushed through it, and now it's easy, right? Just do the same thing every day. And in that aspect, it's almost kind of nice that I don't need to think about what I'm going to eat. I just eat it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's the right way to do it. So.
Well, enough about me. This is about you today. Okay, so going back to where we left off, some of the habits and strategies. How about strategies around managing email, calendar, and to-do lists?
Yeah, those are definitely some of the biggest, three blocks that you need to kind of focus on. Calendar-wise, the kind of the thing we already talked about, where pre-plan your calendar. So, for example, make sure you block a sort of focus time where you need time for you to do what Cal Newport calls deep work. Things we do kind of with distraction free. Make sure you don't have any notifications enabled, either on your screen or your phone. Your phone ideally is on airplane mode, hidden away. Block the breaks ahead of time so you have them kind of consistently. You have lunch. If you have a coffee or a snack in the afternoon, block that as well. So you always have those times. Blocking kind of related work together. So a block of one-on-ones, for example. And then the biggest one is tracking and then reflection at the end. So what I do is I'll typically color code my calendar. And I keep it, again, 3 high-level buckets: people, projects, and what I call miscellaneous or other. And that's just, the breakdown that works for typical kind of tech engineering leaders. It could be different, for someone else. But the idea is at the start of the week, I want to make sure I roughly allocate equal amounts of time to each of those buckets. Some weeks, for example, performance review season, I know there'll be more in the people bucket, so I know that ahead of time. And then at the start of the week, I'll say, okay, I'm spending 10 hours on the people bucket between one-on-ones or, writing, a promotion document or, what have you. And then at the end of the week, I'll reflect and be like, cool, let's look at my calendar. And it's easy to do the math because everything is color-coded. I'd be like, cool, I thought I'd gonna spend, 10 hours. I spent 20 hours on people problems. What happened? Was it an exception? Was there a problem? Or did I just do something wrong? And then iterate and improve on the calendar that way. So that's the calendar. Email wise, so email is interesting, and I take a somewhat extreme approach to how I manage my email, in that emails are mostly other people's priorities at work. So I never start my day by reading email. And for most people out there, I recommend that. It really depends on where it's all about protecting your most creative time. For a lot of people, that's early in the morning. Some people, it's actually, late at night. If you read, Daniel Spink, I had a book on it. It's interesting. But for most folks, it's in the early hours in the morning. And that's where I typically kind of block time to do some of these deep work blocks for myself. And I do not touch email, which is other people's priorities, other people's work. I have my own. I know what I have to get done for the week and typically for the day, and I start by that every morning. And then I have predefined times to check my email. I'm not going to have my email sitting in the background refreshing or sending me a notification where I'm constantly context switching into it. 2 or 3 times a day, I will check my email, and that's it. And then I typically have a way for my team to reach me where they have to, for example, at Amazon, we do like a paging system when things are, if engineers go on call, if, system is down or service is down. So I'll ask people to actually page me if they need me. And that's, enough of a barrier that people wouldn't really do it unless it's actually urgent. Otherwise, I don't have anything that would interrupt kind of those focus blocks. And then the 2 other things on email, one is I have extreme kind of email filtering where if I'm not in the to line, it doesn't come to my inbox. It goes to what I call a catch-all filter. I find that more efficient than spending the time to have very elaborate rules and, very elaborate folder structure. You could build that slowly over time. But the main thing is I'm not in the to line. I don't have to do anything about this email. It does not come to my inbox. If I have some free time later on, maybe towards the end of the day, cool. I could scroll on through that catch-all filter and be like, okay, this is everything that's going on. Doesn't have to, disrupt my day. And then the other one is having a system to follow up on things on the work that needs to get done. So, for example, I'll often, if I, let's say I'm, email someone asking them to do something, I'll often BCC myself, and that way the email kind of comes back to me. And if you're in Gmail, you could kind of snooze that email and check back in X number of days later. Outlook has something similar with their follow-ups. You could do it in Outlook as well. So I do that. And that way, it pops back in my inbox. I'm like, okay, I haven't heard from that person about that thing I delegated. Cool, let's follow up. So that's kind of high level, in a very quick summarized fashion kind of emails.
Ah, that's great. I really like the, if you're not on the to line filter, put it into a different folder. Yeah, that's a good one. I wonder if as people are listening to this, I wonder if they'll think to themselves, this all sounds incredible and like it's going to take forever to set up. That's so much work. In general, outside of your coaching, how many hours a week do you work?
So typically it's less than 40 hours.
Okay. Well, there you
once
go.
You have, especially that's the benefit of having systems in place. And especially you'd be surprised how much work you get done in a proper deep work block. Like you block off 90 minutes, no notifications, one thing to get done at the start of the day, you get it done with high quality, like you've never seen. So you actually get a lot done that way. And if you don't, again, I'll go back to sort of like the 3 pillars: manage yourself, people, and projects. Are you tracking the right, sort of high level KPIs? Are you actually working on the highest kind of important or highest leverage things? Or are you just getting thrown away and distracted left and right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let me take a short break here and share with everyone that teampipeline.us is where you can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. Today, we're speaking with Ahmed Wasfy. Ahmed, when I think about project management, which you've done a fair amount of, it comes down to 3 things for me. What's being done, who's doing it, and when is it going to be finished? Is this more or less the way that you think about project management, or do you have kind of a different fundamental take on it? And if so, what are kind of the critical elements that you look at when managing a project?
Yeah. I mean, that's, you talked about some of the important pieces of managing products for sure. I can tell you sort of what I look at when managing projects. First off, I think it starts with people. Having kind of solid people fundamentals help projects run a lot smoother. Most projects don't fail because of a technical issue or a technical limitation. Most projects fail due to people problems. So I find, having the right kind of people network, knowing how to kind of manage up, down, and sort of, across helps you kind of get ahead of a lot of the project problems that actually kind of derail projects in real life. In terms of, specifics to project management, I have high level kind of principles that I look at. First off, as a person managing a project, as a project manager, you only have 3 levers at your disposal at any given time. You got resources, you got time, you got scope. Those are the 3 things that you could play with to try and shift things in your project. You could throw more people at the project up to a limit, of course. You could extend the timeline, play with the dates, or take things off of your scope so that you kind of get your dates in kind of sooner. So those are kind of knowing that helps you at least know that, it's only one of those 3 things. If you move one, the other 2 will move, and you kind of have to adjust accordingly. Some of the other principles I like to follow, one of them is obvious planning. You need, like you mentioned, you need to plan even if it's with high level sort of milestones and very rough estimates, but just taking the work to plan helps with a couple of things. One, it gets your stakeholders aligned, where everyone is more or less on the same page in terms of what exactly is in scope here. And then the high level estimates, they could be very rough, but they come in handy the more projects you do, because what you do is essentially you track your estimates versus your actuals over time, and it'd be like, cool, we've been consistently off by 20% or however, we have a problem, so let's add that padding going forward. So you're learning from your own history. And speaking of padding, I like to add this idea from Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's co-chair at Berkshire Hathaway, has this idea of a margin of error when they invest in a stock. So they value a stock, say, at $10. He likes to add a 50% margin of error, so they'd only buy it if the stock is at $5 in case he was wrong about it. Same thing for project management, margin of error. Make sure you pad things in case all the estimates are wrong, and you'll get better at that, over time, as I mentioned, by tracking your actuals. And perhaps the last one is accountability, right? You want very clear owners of kind of who are doing all the individual sort of task milestones, and a mechanism to hold them accountable and kind of track the progress of that. In the software world, for example, a lot of people use Scrum, and there are different ways to adjust that to kind of hit all of those things that I just talked about. There are very similar ways of managing projects elsewhere, but those are sort of the main highlights. The last one, as always, reflections or project retrospective, and in the more kind of project, to use a more project lingo. But at the end of the project, always look back and look at ways to improve and iterate to go forward.
Yeah, those are great. I'll add to a couple of those things.
Please.
We, a while ago, started including in our quotes to customers a line item that just says miscellaneous/unknown. And at first I was kind of worried, right? Because customers are going to see this and they're going to be, what do you mean miscellaneous unknown? You should know everything that's going to happen, right? And well, the reality is no, we don't. And so we've been intentionally putting that in as a discrete line item. And so no one actually has pushed back at all on this, which is great.
Yeah.
Says we're working with good, reasonable customers. And then the other thing is, you mentioned over time, you kind of get a sense for how accurate your estimates are. Maybe you need to adjust by 20% or whatever it is. We have just a simple PowerPoint document that has one slide per project that we've completed. And every time we complete a project, we put a couple of pictures of what the deliverable was. We deliver machines and hardware, so you have a picture of that in there. And then a couple of bullet points. One is the number of hours, total hours spent on the project. The other one is total material costs spent on the project. And then a few bullet points. This was lots of R&D on this project, complete manufacturing drawing package, et cetera, stuff like that. And that's been such a useful reference to look back on, because now over time we've built up, dozens of these slides. And if we're quoting another project, we can say, well, that's pretty close to these two. And let's see, what did we actually spend on those two? And that has been a whole lot more accurate than just writing down all the things we think we're going to have to do, and inevitably we forget something. So that's been a good tool for us.
Yeah, no, I love that. There is, in software, there's what we call relative estimates, which tackles something very similar, where humans are inherently bad at coming up with an absolute estimate. If I ask you how long is it going to take you to write, this feature, or, in your case, maybe design this machine, we're really bad at coming up with a wild guess. But estimating the effort relative to something else, be like, cool, so this is kind of similar to this project. Maybe it's like twice as hard. Maybe it's 1.5 times as hard. We tend to be way more accurate when we estimate relative to something else we've done that is kind of similar to it. So I love that.
Great. All right. Thinking back over some of the experiences that you've had as a leader, what was one of the most challenging times for you, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, there is honestly quite a few that come to mind. One of the ones I'll mention is my case, leading one of the AWS services. AWS is a cloud provider. At the time, I was leading a team doing a message broker service in the queue kind of thing. And it was a recently launched service where we had a very high operational load at the time, where essentially engineers would get paged, at night up to like 50 times a week. Imagine getting paged, at 2 or 3 in the morning, multiple times a night. So as you can imagine, engineers were really, really unhappy with this. From one end, and from the other end, it was actually a really profitable business. So we're generating a lot of revenue relative to some of the other kind of similar services in the space at the time. So you could imagine sort of, from like senior leadership's perspective, that project is great, it's critical, we need it. Engineers are getting burnt out on the other end, and something needed to happen in between. So that was definitely kind of one of the more challenging times in my life.
And were you a manager or an engineer at that time?
I was a manager at that time.
Okay.
So and it's a lot of the time as a manager, it feels like you're sort of in this gray zone where you're trying to navigate. You're trying to make things black and white for both your team and your leadership, and kind of you're trying to make the best of what you have, of sorts. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, I did it alone. I was fortunate enough to have great mentors within AWS that have themselves ran, very critical services, and I've seen similar trends in the past. But it was essentially a combination. The way we addressed it was a combination of changing how we have on call. So in the past, we had an engineer would go on call and carry a pager for a week at a time, and you could imagine their week would just be a nightmare. And by the end of it, they just hate their life. So we changed that quite a bit, and what we did was essentially we did it for where we pick a couple of days at a time, and you keep switching. And then I would compensate engineers a lot. So like if you're on call today, you get a day off the next day, so that way you could actually sleep in and things of that nature. And then we'd manage it so that everybody gets equal numbers of weekends and such. So that was sort of the first level of, hey, let's, if your life is not going to be hell, while you have to deal with this, we'll adjust. And then on the other side, kind of addressing the root cause of some of these recurring problems, right? Like, there's often kind of an 80-20 principle, at play where, 80% of the issues you'll find it kind of coming from the same, 20% of the factors, the root causes. So we're trying to address that in parallel. At the time, that meant we're using an open source software. So that meant, trying to patch that and trying to work with our customers as well, to upgrade to the latest versions and whatnot. So it wasn't a very easy overnight fix. It took months to get to a much better state. And then also building automation to handle some of the more recurring things that we don't really need to wake up a human to deal with in the middle of the night. But it was ultimately is about ownership, right? It was about, everyone kind of coming together and owning and being part of this, instead of, engineers blaming leadership and leadership blaming engineers. We're all in this together. How can we become better as a unit out of this?
Yeah. Well, on your website, you talk about something called the power of predictability to master project delivery and execution. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the power of predictability?
Yeah. So that's, again, I mean, it goes back to some of the, product management fundamentals that we have. One of the main things that makes you an effective and successful leader is the ability to deliver on your business goals and targets. To do that, you need to be able to consistently predict with a large degree of confidence when you're actually going to deliver some of the important milestones that you need to deliver. We've mentioned, tracking estimates versus actuals, keep that margin of error. We've already talked about that. Oftentimes, people don't acknowledge that there's a lot of implicit pressure on engineers to come up with sane estimates. So, for example, if engineers know they're in a high-profile project and they know, maybe the next round of funding is going to depend on this new feature launching, or we need to announce this by so-and-so conference, engineers tend to underestimate on purpose because that's, they all want this thing to succeed. And it's often your job as a manager to highlight when that is not, doesn't make sense, or that wouldn't be the case, so you could actually get ahead of it and plan for it accordingly. And one of the things, there's a million different ways to try and tackle this. One of the things I like a lot, and I've worked with a lot of my clients to actually implement, is Monte Carlo simulations. So what these do is essentially you'd simulate, you'd look at a couple of previous, in my case, previous sprints. So sprints are sort of like 2-week chunks of work that your team does. And you could look at, quantify the complexity of the work that happened in those 2 weeks. In Scrum, we use story points, for example, for that. And then what Monte Carlo simulations do is they basically, you give it a range of, let's say we complete between 5 and 10 points, every sprint. And then you give it that range and you tell it, well, we've got 100 points left to complete this project. And, and it runs 500 plus simulations, tracking different numbers and plots almost like a distribution that tells you, cool, this is your project completion date with 80% confidence level, or this is it with 50% if you're just taking the average, and you can move that lever kind of up and down. So often when you look at the 80% number, for example, it's a very late date because that is the one that has a much higher degree to succeed. Most kind of existing project management mechanisms tend to stick to the average or to the P50, where 50% of the time you get it right, but 50% of the time you get it wrong. So highlighting that and more importantly, highlighting that to your stakeholders is very, very important. And then helps you actually predict things accurately, because now you have data. It's not just you saying, hey, this is more complex than we think it is. No, I have data to prove it. And the more data you have, the more historical kind of products you've done or features you've shipped or whatever, you could point to and be like, I'm basing this based on our history so far. This is our, real trajectory. And then that helps you adjust accordingly and either cut scope, ask for more resources, or negotiate the time and so on.
Yeah. Terrific. All right. Well, I think maybe just one or two more questions and we'll wrap things up here. Specifically within the context of your role as an engineer, what is one thing that frustrates you and one thing that brings you joy?
That is a good question. I think the answer changes a lot depending on kind of what stage of your career you're at. Right now, I'd say the thing that frustrates me the most is the number of engineers that do not think outside of their sort of immediate technical scope or engineering discipline. You're not thinking about how this work kind of interacts with maybe other, disciplines in the business, from kind of, from product to project to customer to relationships to, to support. And often kind of taking that holistic view makes you understand things in a completely different light. One, makes you a better engineer and you could work better with cross-functional teams. But also selfishly for yourself, I think it helps your career later on, especially if you decide to get into sort of leadership and perhaps an executive path down the line. One thing that brings me joy, it's the ability to have a large impact on a lot of people. For me these days, that means, on people's careers, people on my team and people I coach, but also, the customers that end up consuming the technology that we build, and seeing that impact. I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that at a number of companies where the impact is in the millions. So that always brings me joy when I see the numbers, and I see kind of, the impact that I have.
Amazing. Yeah, that's terrific. Well, Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you taking this time and sharing all the wisdom and insight that you have. How can people get in touch with you?
Easiest thing is my website, thethrivingem.com. People could reach out there. I've got a regular newsletter that I publish as well that people could sign up for through the website.
And EM, I'm assuming, stands for Engineering Manager?
That's right.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right. Well, go check it out. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Aaron Moncur, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.